Members, we formed a quorum and is also our scheduled time. May I call the meeting to order?
第一個議程呢，就係我哋商量下，即係以後。
The first thing on the agenda is the subjects for the coming few meetings, because we need the research division to help, and we must give them time to be prepared, and we also organize a trip. So the Secretariat has prepared a list of topics for March, April, and May, and we will do the same every month with a rolling plan covering the coming 3 months. Okay. So do members have any views on the 3 proposed subjects here? The first for next meeting will be IT in learning, and then today we will focus on the paper from the administration on housing for the needy, and then the research division is compiling a paper for us on housing assistance for the poor in other countries, and it's going to look at the situation in Singapore. And then also have a topic on relationship between the public's health condition and poverty. That will be taken up in April. And then discussion on the draft report on poverty line will be submitted by the subcommittee, and we hope that our report will be ready in around June, when the administration will also publish its report on poverty line. And then in May, support for disadvantaged groups such as the persons with disabilities, so on and so forth. Dr. Fernando Zhou. We are also in the commission to help the poor, the poverty commission. And I think to a certain extent we should monitor the administration, monitor the poverty commission. I think the progress as well as the recommendations of the committee should be discussed by this subcommittee, and we can also invite deputations to come to give us their views. This is an important point. Regarding proposed subjects for further discussions, I'm not on the Poverty Commission. I don't know about its progress. It's got 6 task forces. Do they have any concrete agenda? Well, I can only monitor their progress on the website. And for task force special groups, I think they've discussed employment for persons with disabilities, support and measures for ethnic minorities, and support for non-Chinese speaking students in the learning of Chinese. Have they come to any conclusions as to these agenda items, or they will just touch on one topic and then put it down and then start a fresh topic? I'm not on the commission, so I don't know how it operates. We expressed our regret once, and you, Chairman, you've written to the commission saying that it is neither transparent nor open, and it has not given us any timetable for its work. So how can we monitor the work of the Poverty Commission? Chairman, can we rely on your membership in the commission to brief us of the progress? Because now, if they do not expect any conclusion of the discussions, and we have to follow up. If not, if they are going to conclude in 6 or 3 months' time, we will see the recommendations. Well, I only joined half of the task force. I'm not on the task force for persons with disabilities. All task forces have only met once. And they will just set a topic for discussion, and it's a brainstorming session of, for instance, social security and poverty line at the first meeting. Anything under the sun. And then from what was spoken by members, you will generally feel that there is a consensus coming. And the officials can also express their views, and then come the next meeting, the views expressed will be turned into a summary of consensus or inclination, and then one further meeting, it will be the conclusion of members' views on that topic. In March and June, there will be 2 plenary sessions, and I think final conclusions going to be made in June. And as for the task force to help ethnic minorities, well, so every time they propose a topic, and it's a brainstorming session, we are given basic information paper, and then after the brainstorming session, the remarks will be summarized into a paper for discussion in the next meeting. But of course, the atmosphere there and also the position of officials present will have an impact on the discussion. We've also got another member from the Poverty Commission here. I think in March there will be preliminary reports from the task forces to the Commission, and then in June concluding reports. So Dr. Chung talked about support for PWDs and ethnic minorities. Well, if we discuss it in May, perhaps it would be a bit late to meet the June deadline. So can we reshuffle the order? So we will, in the second meeting, we will discuss, we're supposed to discuss health and poverty line. Health is not urgent. Let's defer it to the May meeting, and in April we discuss the support for disadvantaged groups such as PWD, so on and so forth. What we can do is for them to have some conclusions for us, to consult us, and we express comments on the conclusions. All right, support for disadvantaged groups such as PWDs, employment for the disabled, that was already done on the 6th of February. Ethnic minorities and also the learning of Chinese by non-Chinese speaking students. I think it is important that we preempt the discussion and give them some of our conclusions. So, May 20th should discussion between the public's health condition and poverty. And then the one already scheduled for May, support for disabled groups, will be advanced to April. I'd like to ask the Secretariat whether there is any practical difficulties. Mr. Zhang Kwok-chu. As far as I understand it, discussing support for disadvantaged groups on the 29th of April will be rather late. I think they will discuss it in early April. It may be better if we advance the item to the 25th of May. Have we already informed the relevant parties to come on the 25th of March already? Not yet, because the April meeting will be at the end of the month. That may be just after their meeting. So we advance it further to the 25th of March to swap with IT. Okay. Support for disadvantaged groups scheduled for the 20th of May will be advanced to the 25th of March. It will swap with the item on IT scheduled for March the 25th. Unless we feel that we should discuss IT first before health implications. If members don't mind, can we just swap the two items? IT and support for disadvantaged groups. Okay. Now, it is just my estimation. I think in June, all 6 task forces will have reports to the Commission, and the important issues will be will launch public consultation in during the summer. And I think any proposal on poverty line would also be done in the summer. Dr. Fernando Chan, thank you. There are 6 task forces for education and training task force. Yesterday, it discussed student financing schemes for students with financial difficulties, and also measures and training programs for young people that are unemployed. So will there be any concluding reports in June? I'm sure all 6 task forces will have reports for the Commission in June. We may not be able to catch up with the discussion of all 6 task forces. Well, they have a task force on innovation where the scope is wider than the one for social enterprises. And also we may also want to follow their agenda for education. Dr. Zhang? Well, Community Care Fund, we know it well. And then social participation, social involvement is something very wide. And social enterprises is also something rather long-standing. So there is no urgency unless they have specific proposals to make. Social Security and Disability Allowance, there is another subcommittee to follow up. And CSSA payments, I think the Welfare Services Panel can also follow up on that. So I'm more concerned about support for disadvantaged groups and sort of task force for training and employment. I think in May, the latest, we must discuss the education issue. That means we have to defer the proposals here to June, assuming that we only discuss 2 issues per meeting. Dr. Kwokaki, regarding health condition and poverty, I don't know whether the chairman has the chronically ill in mind or people who are poor because of the health, such as students with special education needs. And the employability of some people affected because of their handicaps. And also, for instance, under the influence of mental illness. Some may have obsessive compulsive behavior, causing them to be poor, and also the chronically ill.
Say they have chronic kidney illnesses or some illnesses that are not immediately apparent. Those illnesses affect their employment and education. So if we try to help them, I would suggest you get some of the relevant people to come, parent associations, the patients and their families, and the institutes and so on. So if you leave the government to issue documents, they won't have much to say. So we don't have the research division's report today, and their document today is not very helpful at all. Now, we have talked about the 3 topics till May, and maybe we can add another meeting today, and that would focus on medical care, and we invite the professional groups to come, as Dr. Kwok said, and the 25th of April meeting on healthcare, that would be swapped to later, because healthcare, health condition, that covers many areas. Now, it's not just poverty. For the middle class, they suffer. So we add another meeting before June, which focuses on healthcare and the family health. I support that before June. So we asked the Secretariat to arrange for another meeting. Maybe 3 hours, maybe one group for our own discussion, and then 2 hours to meet with the groups and the officials. So in number 2, we take out the health condition, and then we add education. Ms. Chen Yuan, can you please go over health, and then education, and what's the other one, the third one? So 25th of March, originally it's IT, and the Poverty Commission doesn't have this topic, so it's not that urgent for us. And they have one on disadvantaged groups. That task force has already met once and does something with the media, and they have a general meeting, and the task force would have to report. And the first meeting of the task force, they do some kind of brainstorming. They reach some kind of consensus, which becomes the focus of the second meeting that will represent the Commission's views. So preliminary report in March, I expect, and then some summary report in June. So you are talking about the task force reports. They will all come out in March. Yes, preliminary reports, and then at a later stage there will be reports for June. Now, if they come out with a report, then we have to follow. So I think it's difficult for our management. Now, they may not fully disclose their conclusions. So as Dr. Fernando suggested, the disadvantaged groups will be put on 25th of March. Well, they don't publish it, but we can ask them for it. Well, they turn it down. They say it's not mature conclusions, so we don't issue them. Now, they don't even give us the agenda. The Secretariat is aware of that. Now, we issued a letter to reproach them. Now, we want to have a discussion. We are friendly in our attitude, but they don't give it to us, even though we reprimand them. So what do you suggest we do? Say on education. Now, the budget spend some time on this. Now, we are concerned about people who can't attend university and so on. So these have to do with their future employment prospects. So the task force should give us some material, and then we can give some opinion to be constructive. Now, that's our view. The administration says that the relevant information will be updated and uploaded to our websites from time to time on a timely basis. We already expressed our regret in that with that letter. So 25th of March, IT, that subject will be for 20th of May, and that will be swapped to the with the disadvantaged groups issue, and then the 29th of April, the topic on health would be substituted by education and poverty. And then we will add another meeting which focuses on health and poverty, and that will be maybe 3 hours, 1 for our discussion and 2 hours to meet with the groups. Okay? So we adopt that arrangement. Thank you. So we come to our document today, which is about housing, so we invite the officials to join us. I just raised my hand in advance. I have another meeting next door. I want to say something on stamp duty. Welcome the two officials. We have Mr. Tony Liu, Assistant Director of Housing, and Mr. Chow Wing Hang, PAS for Labor and Welfare. We have received your document, so I believe members have read those. So you can highlight some important issues on housing and poverty, and then we will have more time for discussion. Chairman, members, we thank you for your invitation to discuss housing assistance for persons with low income. Now on housing, the Assistant Director will take us through on this topic, Mr. Liu. First, I will give a brief introduction on the housing arrangements for low-income persons, and mainly we work through public rental housing, or PRH, and on admission to HOS, if they are low-income families, they apply through the waiting list, and on the supply of PRH, we build on average about 15,000 new flats per year. And we also recover about 7,000 units that would be available for waiting list applicants. So we expect to supply about 22,000 units, and we have some measures for those who previously applied for subsidized home ownership schemes such as HOS, and we allow them to apply anew for PRH. And we now, if the URA has some redevelopment projects, we have reserved some PRH units, and also there are people who are affected by enforcement action of buildings department, and we've reserved units for them too. And those who are already PRH tenants, and if their income is low, of course they can continue to occupy PRH. They have to pay the existing rent. Now, if the income is lower than a certain level, we have a rent assistance scheme, or RAS. Now, we have 12,400 PRH tenants that benefit from the RAS, and they have short-term difficulties. Now, those who have long-term financial difficulties, then they would be assisted by CSSA. And if their income falls and they want to move to cheaper units, we have that arrangement too. And then also, if within their homes, the family want to add some children to look after the parents or to support their parents, now under the Harmonious Families Addition scheme, that is allowed. And for disabled persons and the elderly, if they want to modify the facilities inside the unit, we do that free of charge as a service. And we also have an emergency alarm system the EAS. Now, for non-CSSA elderly persons, they can get the one-time grant, one-off grant, and for when low-income families, if they change flats, we exempt payment of rent deposit. Now, we still have 40 elderly persons getting rent allowance for elderly scheme. That's for private housing. Mr. Chow, I will focus on the rent allowance under CSSA. I have 3 main points. The first point is that overall, the CSSA rent allowance, according to our latest information as of December 2012, there are altogether 235,600 units who benefit, and 60% are in PRH. So we meet the rental needs, and then there are about 51,000 units who in various kinds of hostels and private homes, 29,000 plus units, about 12% of the total. And in February, groups expressed concern about the adjustment of our monthly maximum rental allowance, whether that can catch up with the market rental changes. Now, every year we have an adjustment, and the latest adjustment took place on 1st of February, and that was an increase of 7.8% in the MRA, maximum rental allowance, the limit. Now, so 89% of the households get their rent covered under the MRA, and members are concerned about private housing, the proportion. Now, after the adjustment, over half are able to meet their rental needs. Now, the adjustment mechanism will be adjusted every year in accordance with the movement of the CPI, Consumer Price Index A. This is in respect of the 50% of families who receive a lower income, and we will this year monitor any increase in CPI-A, and we will consider also the circumstances of the household concerned. And the document also mentions that we note that the tenants in the past, they received alleviation measures from the Community Care Fund. So if they are private tenants and they pay a rent higher than the rent allowance supplied by us, in the past we have a measure which give them a special subsidy. Now, in about 22,600 CSSA households benefited from the program. And yesterday, the Chief Secretary for Administration also told us about the next stage of the work of the Community Care Fund.
Yes. For CSSA recipients living in private housing, now if they are in a similar situation, then the CCF would provide relief as a further measure. Well, in February, we adjusted the MRA by 7.8%. We believe that under the new relief measures, the number of households would be about 17,000 households. And then the SBD received a positive response for the implementation of such relief measures. Thank you. I read out the name. Dr. Kin-kee, Chen Yahan, Li Chuyan, Fernando, Zhang, Mkapiu, Zhang Gokchu, Liang Yuzhong, myself. Dr. Kin-kee, Chairman. 5 minutes each, okay? The FS, a middle-class person earning more than 3 million a month, a year, said a host of nonsense. And then this afternoon we have Assistant Director of Housing and PS for Labour and Welfare. Our land and housing policy is the main cause of poverty in Hong Kong, and the culprit is the Hong Kong government. There is no one from the development panel, and there is no officials who have any say here. So they are here to answer our questions, but they are neither here nor there to help to answer our questions. 40% of the recipients are living in private housing, and if in 6P or above families, the MRA is just $5,000 odd. So I'd like to know whether you know what is the rent per square foot. It's $128. So 6 persons will live in about 200, can only afford a 250 square feet room, and that means a subdivided flat. And then because subdivided flats are sought after, some of them are as expensive as $60 per square foot. All right. As you know, 40% of the CSSA recipients are living in private housing. How are you going to help them? What you are doing is not really to help, but to hurt them. Well, given the MRI they receive, they have no choice but to live in subdivided flats. Is it true that, as the Secretary for Development said, there is value for subdivided flats to exist in Hong Kong? Mr. Chow. Thank you, Dr. Kwok, for your question. Now, if CSSA households are eligible to apply for public housing, most of them can or will apply for public housing. And then through our public housing mechanism, we provide their basic housing needs. I'm asking you about those on the waiting list who have waited hard and long for an allocation. How are you really going to help them? Mr. Chow. We'll continue to help them by the rent allowance scheme. So you continue to encourage them to live in a 200 square foot subdivided flat? Well, every year we adjust the MRI according to the trends in the market. And for our relief measures, we had relief measures in 2011, and it's just been announced that this year there will be another round of relief measures. And I'm sure we will consider the actual situation faced by households and give them concrete help. Chairman, the CCF Community Care Fund, well, as we said yesterday, is just back assistance, back support fund. So these people have to pay very high rent. So you give them one-off subsidy. How long can that last? For 1 month only. All right, last year, according to property index, rose by 20%. Only last year alone. So for households eligible for CSSA, for those who are 6 or 5, have 6 or 5 family members. Can you promise here that their rental or the MRI can be increased by 20 or 40%? Because some of them may face a rental increase of up to 40% in subdivided units, rather popular in the district. We consider the CPIA in making the adjustment, and in the past, LegCo has asked SWD to make reference to the actual adjustment or movement in rental, private rental of these CSSA households. Well, on the 1st of February, before we made the adjustment, we had a reference index of CSSA households. So the rise was actually lower than the proposed 7.8% here. Well, are you kidding, Mr. Chow? I give you 7.8% and you rent a flat to show me. You are speaking nonsense in heaven. 7.8%, how can they accommodate a whole household? Well, this is the first time I've heard of this. Madam Chair, in your hand. Thank you. I've no intention to make life difficult for the two officials, but they won't be able to answer our questions. Now, if we agree that the housing problem has added to the difficulties of the grassroots, well, and the two officials are just repeating what policies they have. They are not here to discuss with us or to explore with us possibilities. I won't say whether they are competent or not, but it's just that they fail to answer our questions. For instance, subdivided units. C.Y. Leung said in his policy address very clearly that for those living in such subdivided units, the living conditions were very much like those living in hillside squatter huts back in the 1960s. So how is the government going to help this group of poor households? We haven't faced up to their difficulties. This morning, I'm sure you have heard many callers in phone-in programs asking FS questions since its announcement of the budget. Now, they are the have-nots, they are poor, they are eligible for PRH. They've been waiting for 5, 6, or 7 years, and yet they've not been allocated a flat. All right, and for assistance in the current budget, there is nothing to help the have-nots because they are not living in PRH and they are very poor. So these people are in poverty, and Chairman, I understand that it's useless for the two officials to answer our questions as a routine. For instance, many elderly tenants in PRH are living a very difficult life. They need help. They need young people to take care of them. And yet it is the government's policy to split households, that is the well-off families. Well, just last night, a tenant told me that, well, I am paying double rent already. Well, my children make a monthly salary of $10,000, but they don't pay their salaries to me. So I think the Housing Bureau has to tell us how it is going to address this problem. Mr. Chow? First, housing assistance to the have-nots. I'd like to make a supplement here. Well, the Community Care Fund would take care of special groups of people not in our CSSA yet, but those who need help. We provide some relief to them. Now they have to be and have the non and have nots, and we also hope that we can learn how to give them assistance in the future. And as for housing, I talked about CSS8 households living in private housing. Well, let's not waste time, Mr. Chow. Mr. Chow, the question is very simple. We have a group of people waiting for PRH for a long time. Some have been waiting for 5, 6, 7 years. You have to tell the budget. You have to tell the FS. Something must be done, and there must be rent subsidy to them. I am very unhappy with your housing policies and the well-off housing, well-off tenants policy. Well, you because of that policy, grown-up children have to leave the household. Otherwise, they'll have to pay double rent. Well, for low-income families that are in difficulty, we will offer another round of subsidy under the Community Care Fund. An assistance program was done in the past, benefiting about 24,000 persons. And 1P household got $3,000, 2P $6,000, and 3P above households $8,000. The CSWA announced once again that we will offer them a subsidy at a level no smaller than what I've just mentioned, and we will also relax the eligibility criteria. We believe that this time we'll be able to help 60 to 70,000 households. And for elders living in private housing, we will offer a subsidy. And last time it was 4,000 for singleton, 8,000 for doubleton, and 12,000 for 3P or above households. And last time we benefited 2,000 households. Please be concise, Mr. Liu. Yes, Madam Chang, your hand was very correct, and therefore we have the harmonious families addition policies. So for younger families, if they are willing to take care of the elders at home, then they can be added to existing to sitting leases. Yeah, you talk about those where. Well, for if they have exceeded the income limit, they can't continue to stay on. For households that have exceeded your household income, I don't see how you can allow these families to be added.
According to the harmonious family addition policy, now even if the son has income twice the waiting list income limit, he is still allowed to move in. Now, if that's the case, I wouldn't be so worried. I can cite you a number of cases. Well, he is saying that if you are not the super rich tenants, if you are not yet 3 times the limit, they can move in. Well, is that right? Yes, it's recorded. Well, it's hard to talk on the major issues today. We all know that. Now, if you can get into PRH, of course, they wouldn't have much difficulty, but the problem is those who live in subdivided units. Now, there are single mothers who have a child with them. The mother hasn't lived here for 7 years. The children are born locally and they couldn't get in. And you have 50%. You have the 50%. Is it that a single parent with a child who hasn't lived for 7 years and the other is a permanent resident, is that can they get in to PLH? The child is not yet 17, of course. Can you relax that? Well, one-to-one, that's allowed now. Mr. Liu, the existing policy is that they have to meet the PLH eligibility requirement. If one half meets the requirement of residency, that's allowed. That is 1-for-1, one or 1-to-1. Now, the case mentioned by Ms. Chen just now is that the child is not yet 18, then we rent the unit to them. That's difficult because the child cannot be the occupant, the person who signs on behalf of the household. Now, we talk about the micro issues first. You have to resolve these issues. Now, single parents, they get food from food bank, they live in subdivided units, they are in dire circumstances, so you should try to help them. Now, we would leave the major issues later, but I hope we get an understanding on this. Will you relax that, Mr. Director? We have to look at our overall housing resources. So you just take the usual line, so I don't bother with that. Now, second question. First, we know that there are this group of people, and the second category of people, I didn't hear what was said about 7.8. Now, Mr. Chow Ing-hang said for para 19 there was an increase of 7.8%, but actual rental increase was less than that. Now, does that include PLH too? Now, if you include PLH, that's meaningless. Did you calculate with the PLH tenants included? No, it's private housing adjustment, rental adjustment. Is that CSSA households or Chairman? It's according to the CPIA with further adjustment, and we get the number 7.8%. And just now, I said that we came up with a reference index for private housing tenants. We did some kind of simulation and got that figure, and we found that the adjustment was less than 7.8%. Why does that happen? Now, 7.8% was the average. Now, for CSSA households, it's less than 7.8%. So you count the actual rental payout. Now, the increase might be zero because the increase might be every 2 or 3 years. So at the time of the survey, maybe some of those did not have rental increases for those years, so you average out to be less than 7.8%. So for those within control group, how many of them had their rents increased? Now, how many actually were affected by rent increases? Do you have that figure? Or did you have some kind of weighting system which resulted in a lower figure? Now, all those we surveyed, all the tenants were surveyed. Some of them had leases for more than 1 year, and they may not suffer an increase in rent. Now we take an average, so that reflects the overall rate of increase. So we think our statistical method is appropriate. Now the problem is, now if your baseline base figure is enough, that's fine, but the base figure is inadequate. it doesn't reflect the actual private market rental. So the base figure is deficient, and you also average the rental increases, so it doesn't reflect the actual rental increases that the CSSA households have to deal with. So you have to fix the base figure first. Now, the base figure, now remember in electrical there was a figure for the base figure, how many already paid increases higher than the MRA right now, how many were paying rent higher than the maximum rent allowance. Now, it used to be 40-odd%. Well, do you have a figure now? It's about 40%. Now, our relief measures should benefit those who pay rent higher than the MRA. That's about 17,000 households. So that's the community care fund, 17,000 units. You pay them subsidies of $1,000 and $2,000. Now, originally it's $22,600. Why is it reduced to 17,000? Now, this month we make an adjustment, so some of those who had a shortfall, and now their rent is completely covered because of the subsidy, and the social welfare department will look at the relief measures this time to see how the existing tenants can be helped. Dr. Fernando Chung, no matter how they calculate it, after all the arithmetic, now ultimately those who are renting private housing, over 40% pay rent higher than the MRA. So that means no matter how you calculate it, I'm aware of how you calculate it. I know it's wrong. CBIA is wrong because CBIA is for those with income below the 50th percentile. It's an average of their past rentals. Now, CSSA households are not that 50%. You take the average for the half of Hong Kong households, whereas CSSA households are near the bottom of the income profile. Now, 60% of the CSSA households have to pay extra for their rentals, and after adjustment, you still have 40%. So your mechanism is a failure. Now, in the past, you used to have a policy that with the adjustment, you maintain at least 90% proportion of CSSA households renting from the private market, having enough to pay for the rent. Now, you must end up having 90% who don't have to pay out of pocket. Secondly, some families have children who enter universities, tertiary institutions, they're over 18, they try to study for associate degrees or whatever, then they apply for grant loans, and then they are immediately taken out of the CSSA household, but they still live in their homes, and then they lose the rent allowance. Oh, so they already pay out of pocket for rents, and when the children enter university, they have to pay out of their living expenditure. So the grant loans is not enough for living expenses. They lose the rent allowance now. So the government should review this. If the children enter university, you should continue to pay them the rent allowance. You should even pay them the CSSA allowance. Now, at least you should not cancel the rent allowance. Mr. Chow, on the first part of the question, now in 1996 at the time, there was a one-off adjustment for the rent allowance. At the time, we had reference to the level mentioned just now, and later in 1998, we provided some figures for LegCo, and LegCo agreed that CBIA would be used for reference for the adjustment of the MRA. Now, after 1998, if we merely look at the price index, now the rents fell in certain years, whereas in those years we didn't adjust downward the MRA. And then in the last couple of years, we had reference to the previous levels, and we found that rentals have caught up, so we adjusted upward the MRA. As for whether we can go back to 1996 and maintain the ratio of approximately 90%, earlier we put it to LegCo that we have to take into account many factors. For instance, with the adjustment, will the overall rental level be affected, and this will affect other tenants. Now, that's one of the factors. Now, I'd like to tell the chairman and members that with this adjustment, we don't only work by the mechanism, we provide relief measures for these tenants. Now, more specifically, there is now a judicial review case which is now with the court, and so I cannot comment in detail at this stage. He didn't answer the second part, and also regarding the first part, now if you are scared, then you should impose rent control, and this is actual payment on actual disbursement on actual payment. So you shouldn't worry about rents being pushed upward. If you're worried, you should impose rent control.
Well, we have to consider the overall housing situation when it comes to rent control, because with rent control, you might affect the supply of housing in the market, and therefore we have to think very carefully about imposing rent control. And then, if member of the household has moved up to tertiary education, I understand that you can apply for a loan from the Student Financial Assistance Agency, and therefore deduction will be made. However, I don't have the relevant information with me. I will get the information from SWD for members' information as soon as possible to see whether there is any deduction correspondingly, and if yes, the rationale for that. Mr. Chen Pan. Well, I believe the two officials here are too junior, so this discussion may not come to anything, but I'd like them to provide the following statistics, and that is the amount of money needed for implementing the following two proposals. First, CSSA households living in private housing, and it appears that 48% of them are paying rent above the MRI. Now, if we follow Mr. Lee Chuk-yan's suggestion to make MRA high enough to cover 90% of the CSSA households, what will be the money involved? And for those who have been on the PRH waiting list for more than 3 years, can some rent assistance be provided to them in the interim, assuming that the same amount will be paid under MRI? So what will be the money involved? I hope that the administration can give us a supplementary information paper. That doesn't mean that it is the government's position, but I just like to know the extra resources involved. And I also like to share with you my views. I think two issues have added to the demand for housing. First, the well-off family policies. Now, for the second generation that's very rich, if they have become professionals, I think there is a high chance for them to leave public housing and be the home owners. But the pseudo middle class, those earning about $20,000 per month, have you assessed the additional demand for housing because of this group of people? Secondly, we have received many such cases. New arrivals are parents of the applicant or children of the applicant, and yet they are over 18 years old and not yet 60 years old, and therefore they cannot be added to the existing tenancy. In Tung Chung, I've come across many such cases. They applied for re-entry visas to Hong Kong when they were 15. By the time it is approved, they will be 20 years old. So I'd like to know whether what is the impact of this on the demand for public housing. And I have seen many cases where an applicant becomes divorced or bereaved. So instead of the husband being the main tenant or the principal tenant, the wife becomes the principal tenant. So they have to apply for MRA, or rather apply for rent assistance. And the wife is told that he has to be the principal tenant for 2 years before she can be eligible for RAS, but then the wife will not be able to fulfill that criterion. First, some children might have exceeded the income limit because of the well-off family policy and are asked to move out. Now, if his income is higher than the limit and he has to move out, then he is no longer eligible to apply for PRH. Of course, if the exceedance is not too high, he can apply for an HOS flat. And of course, the well-off family policy has attracted the concern of members, and we've undertaken that in the long-term housing strategy committee, there will be a review of this policy to see whether it has given rise to some other issues. I hope that when the long-term housing strategy public consultation paper is published, we can have the opportunity to discuss this issue further. And then for new arrivals, well, we have already relaxed the criteria under harmonious families addition policies. Even adult children over 18 years old can have their names added. But of course, in the existing tenancy, there is already a married son and living together with the elderly parent. No, I think a harmonious families addition scheme only apply to tenants that are over 60 years old, but the cases are referred to, well, these parents are only in their 40s or 50s. Well, they may not be able to add the names to the tenancy, but if it is on a short-term basis, then the children can live there temporarily. And I think it is fairer to require the new arrival to join the PRH waiting list. And if a wife has suddenly become bereaved and she's not eligible for RAS, well, I think it's correct to say that person has to be the principal tenant for 2 years before he can apply for RAS. But for really special cases, we can give special consideration. Please give up the case. Give me the case for consideration after the meeting. Now, will the discussion rest with the HD or the SWD? Well, if it's a case of bereavement, if the spouse passing away, then we don't necessarily have to go to the SWD. We have our policies to allow us to handle such cases. Mr. John Kwok-Chu. Dr. Fernando John talked about grown-up children going to Ivy institutions or universities, so on and so forth. They can apply for a grant or loan under the student financial assistance scheme, and that person will no longer be eligible for CSSA. And I have seen cases where the student would rather continue to receive CSSA and not a loan under a student financial assistance agency. So please check whether that is allowed, because a loan has to be repaid, and that will make him even worse off than being a CSSA recipient. So this is not just about the rent. He will really have no means to support himself. So I'd like to know the rationale for kicking him out of the eligibility net for CSSA if he is admitted to university. And I'd like to know whether there are such statistics. Those who have applied for PRH and have been waiting for more than 3 years or even 4, 5, 6 years without any first offer, is it easy for them to get subsidy for renting private premises? Do you have such statistics? We know for sure that rental in the private housing would be much higher than the future PRH rent. Otherwise, the applicant need not have applied for PRH. I think in 2001, you had allowance for the elderly, rent allowance for elderly scheme. And according to the paper, the response rate was low. I don't know why, but if you are to revive it today, I'm sure it'll be very popular, because back then the scheme only applied to elderly singletons. Now you can fix it for 4 years, I don't mind. If rent allowance can be given to somebody who has been on the PRH waiting list for 4 years, that would be okay. I don't think such applicants mind waiting even a little bit longer for PRH if they are given a rent allowance while waiting. So those who have been on the waiting list for 3 to 4 years, not necessarily elderly applicants, to give them rent allowance. I think Mr. Tang asked a similar question. Mr. John Kwok-Chu asked about people on the PRH waiting list and renting a flat in the private sector. Well, we don't really have such statistics. And rent allowance for elderly scheme, RAES. In 2001, there was pilot scheme in relatively older districts such as Wan Chai. No public housing was available. We understand that in such districts there are more tenement or old buildings. So if you offer them a flat in Sha Kei Wan or Kennedy Town, well, it would still be inconvenient for these elderly persons. And back then it was regarded as unhelpful if we were to move elderly persons away from their familiar neighborhood to a PRH flat. So we launched a pilot scheme, but it was not very well received. We asked elderly applicants waiting for PRH the reason why they did not accept the rent allowance. And we understand that most elderly persons would rather be given public housing because they would enjoy more protection when it comes to things like rent increases. So the scheme was seized after 2 years' time. Mr. Zhong Guoqun asked whether we can extend the scheme to applicants that have been waiting for PRH for a certain period of time. Again, this is a wider issue. And I think on various occasions, the administration has explained that there are a few issues that have to be studied more carefully before we can come to a decision. So our current policy is still to provide mainly PRH. Thank you. Mr. Leung Yu-chung, my turn. Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Regarding rent control, I think we've heard Mr. Siwa Leung, CE, said in public and in other conditions that with rent control, many landlords may choose not to let their properties instead. So there would be less supply as a result. I don't know whether this is a valid reason. Some landlords have purchased properties hoping that the rent can offset their mortgage repayment. So even with rent control, it doesn't mean that they are not going to lease or to let their properties. So this is not a very good reason. If the administration insists that this is a valid reason, please substantiate it with objective data. Otherwise, the administration has to tell us at the next meeting as to why rent control cannot be introduced to residential properties.
Well, of course, for commercial premises, we also hope that there would be rent control, but we limit ourselves to residences today. But we hope that you can give us with a detailed report on what basis and on what data do you object to rent control. And also in the document today, when we talk about poverty and housing, it's not just the elderly who have housing problems and when they are in poverty. Now we have a problem of the working poor. That includes many young people who cannot move into PRH. They have left their families, or it's one son, one daughter policy or well-off tenants policy. So they had to move out of PRH and they live in private housing by themselves. They receive low income. Now, they received $6,000 or $7,000 in the old days when they didn't have received a minimum wage, and now they may be getting $7,000 or $8,000. Now they are paying $2,000 or $3,000 in rental. It's not cheap at all for them. That's a typical case of the working poor, of working poverty. Now, for singletons applying for PLH, the point scheme, very often they don't qualify, or they cannot move in even if they wait for 6 or 7 years. So some of them are set back. We have held press conferences on this topic. Now, we have 2,000 or 3,000 young persons applying for PLH every year. So I'd like to ask Mr. Liu, can you rethink the arrangement for singletons applying for PLH? What's your current arrangement? Will you have a separate queue, or will you increase the quota so that they can get out of poverty and they can get relatively low rent, low cost housing? Mr. Liu? Mr. Leung Yu-chung mentioned the singletons. Now, that is true. They do wait for longer periods, and the housing authority did discuss that in the past year, whether there would be a across-the-board policy, or is it that the somewhat older persons who are not yet elderly and who do not earn high income, can there be a separate queue of them? We are studying that. Now, you are thinking of those over 35. I know that. But even for those under 35 and over 18, they also encounter this problem. So don't just consider them if they are. Just consider those over 35. Now, for this issue, it will be under the Committee for Long-Term Strategy Review. So they will consider this along on a holistic basis to see how resources can be allocated to the most needy in our society. I know there isn't much time. Can you promise that you can give us a more comprehensive report on rent control, especially on residential housing? Thank you. Of course, this is not under the Labor and Welfare Bureau, but we will convey this request to the relevant policy bureau. I have similar views as Mr. Leung Yu-chung, especially on working poverty. Recently, I received a similar case. There's a couple, both young, in the 20s, with a baby, and the husband earns $9,000 odd. The wife has a part-time job, 4 hours, $3,000 odd. They earn in total about a little over $13,000, and they pay rental over $5,000, and they have less than $8,000 left, and they have to pay very high prices for baby formula, and they live in Yuen Long, where rental is cheaper, and if they want to move into the inner city, they would have great difficulty indeed. So these are the working poor. So of course it would be ideal if they can get into PLH 10 to $10 or $1 to $2,000 in rental, in tuition, why that would solve the problem for them. But for those who are still struggling in private housing, there are quite a number of them. Looking at paragraph 20 of your document, you mentioned that even for those receiving CSSA, there are 22,600 households who are receiving the one-off subsidy paid by the Community Care Fund, ranging from in amounts of $1,000 and $2,000 respectively. Now, this is just better than nothing. Now, these are CSSA recipients. Now, they are better off than the working poor. Now, if they move into PLH, now, according to Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan, many of them cannot get into PLH. Even if they queue up, they will not get to move in. Now, for them, even if they receive CSSA, it would be very difficult for them. For these 22,000 odd CSSA recipients, households, how many of them cannot qualify for PLH? They cannot get the G number. Well, they should qualify, right? If they are CSSA recipients, they should qualify for PLH. Well, the two are not the same. If you get CSSA, you may not qualify for PLH. For instance, in the case mentioned by Lee Cheuk-yan, for instance, not yet 7 years in Hong Kong. Now, for singletons, they may have special permission. Single parent families, they may have special permission. Now, for these 22,000 households, how many of them cannot get into PLH, have no chance? How do you solve the housing problem for them? So it's less than 1 in 1, so they can't get in. So the government pays them $1,000 or $2,000. They still have to wait for a few years before they can get the G number, and then they have to wait a few years more. Mr. Liu, perhaps I give the information. The chairman is right. Now, for getting the G number, as long as you meet our income limit, if say for 3 person households, you don't earn more than 17,060, and if you don't own property. I'm not talking about exceeding the income or asset limit. It's like what Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan said. Single parent family, none of the family has lived here over 7 years. They are on CSSA. How many years do they have to wait for PLH? Now, for the 22,000, Mr. Chow can supplement. But for us, for those who are on the waiting list, and if they are not, if they don't meet the 7-year residency requirement yet, now actually there are only 3,000 or 4,000 such cases. Let me supplement. Right now, we don't have figures by such categories. When they apply for CSA, they don't have to supply information to Housing Department whether they are waiting for PLH. Now, if there are special difficult circumstances, if they have physical needs, our social workers will offer a compassionate arrangement and refer the cases to housing authority, and they can get into PLH earlier. And also those who are queuing for compassionate housing and those who are queuing for elderly homes, if they pay rent higher than the MRA, maximum rental allowance, we will pay them the full amount of rent for them to help them while they are still waiting. Now, I have some more information for Mr. Leung. Now, if not more than half, if not yet half of the family have 7 years residency, they can still be on the queue, but they must have over half the family over 7 years residency by the time when they are actually offered a unit. So they can get the G number, and they will be any new arrival can get a G number on the first day, and then maybe a few years later there will be over half of the household who have meet the residency requirement. Also, I'd like to get some information. Now, we are talking about the housing and poverty. Now, that's different situation for private housing as compared to public housing. Now, say for those in PRH, $5,000 ranging to $60,000, and the same income range as private housing. Now, how much help is the public housing offering? Now, say if I live in PRH, these 70,000 households, the median income is, if in private housing, say 3,000. Now, in those in PRH, 1,500. So for these families, how much help is PRH offering? And in the future, the government may provide a poverty line, and it's being argued 50% or 60% of median household income. Now, for these families under poverty line, how much rent are they paying in private housing, and how much are they paying for public housing? So we can see whether the public housing is helping these poor families. So we can come up with a conclusion that the effective way to help poor families is to build sufficient PRH. Now, this is related to the issue being discussed by Poverty Commission. Now, we try to resolve poverty through housing. There are two ways. First, we offer them a housing unit that charges a low rent, so they pay less for rental. Secondly, they live in private housing. They pay high rental, but we offer them some money to reduce their housing expenditure, so they have more money to be used for other expenses. So for families under the poverty line, if they move into PRH, reduced by how much, and if they can't get into PRH, they receive subsidy to live in private housing. So after the government determines a poverty line, would we have such a similar logic, and would they come up with a policy accordingly? Now, otherwise you don't have a policy. Now you should have a policy for on the basis of which you pay these families. Otherwise, the poverty line is useless. So at least the poverty line would be able to help these people with regard to housing. Now, perhaps you can talk to the Housing Poverty Commission or to your relevant department or bureau.
The second issue is calculating the RMA for CSSA households, because many CSSA households have aired their grievances to us because the MRI they're getting cannot help them to rent any housing in the urban areas in particular. If half of them have faced rent increases but not the other half, and you average it out, then you will be dragged down the increases. Perhaps you should only take into account those who have seen rent increases. The mechanism has created an underestimate of rent increase. Let's say the rent increase has been 10%. However, 50% of the CSSA households have not faced any rent increases. So there is something wrong with your mechanism in calculating the MRA. Otherwise, CSSA households have to use their other living expenses to subsidize their rent. Now, if PRH is subsidizing households, well, CSSA households are those who are absolutely poor in Hong Kong. So you cannot, if they are living in private housing, they cannot really achieve the minimum living standard devised for CSSA households because of the faulty mechanism in calculating the MRA. Perhaps on the first question. Now we have 720,000 PRH households. You'd like us to tell you their income. We do have such information with us. That is the amount of rent they're paying, the household income, so on and so forth. We do have such statistics. But you want us to compare that with comparable households. Let's say earning households with $20,000 monthly income, how much they're paying in rent in the private sector. I dare not say that we have such information for comparison. My initial reaction is that we don't have such information, but I'll discuss with our relevant colleagues to see whether we have such a comparison. But I can foresee a practical difficulty because of the purpose of data collection. But we will go back and check and see how much we can offer. You understand the comparison I'm talking about? I do. Mr. Chow. I gave a response to Mr. Lee, and I have no further elaboration. And I'll go and check whether we have further follow-up information. All right, second round. Dr. Fernando Zhang, 4 minutes each, since we don't have too many colleagues left. Thank you. The MLA is proved to be wrong, because it hasn't been able to cover rent for CSSA households for a long time. So this is a big policy problem because the calculation of a basic allowance under CSSA is very harsh. There is no leeway for rent subsidy at all. So CSSA households are expected to spend out of pocket for rent, and this is against the CSSA policy. So the administration must review the situation. And for new arrivals that have not fulfilled the 7-year residence in Hong Kong, yesterday morning, the Subcommittee on Long-Term Housing Strategy were told that about 5,000 odd households have to have their applications frozen, most of them because they have not satisfied the 7-year rule. Perhaps there are cases referred to you by Mr. Bayu, Chairman. They've already got a G number, but because they have not satisfied the year of residence rule, their applications are frozen. I'm quite worried that a lot of them are single parent families. So I hope the Housing Department can give consideration to single-parent families, they should be given an exemption. They have fulfilled the criteria for PRH eligibility, and there are children involved. If because of the mother's situation, these children are required to live in, if because of the mother's resident status, these children are forced to live in subdivided flats, then we are very concerned. And also the 1,000, 2,000 households, or rather, are giving them a one-off subsidy of $1,000 and $2,000. Well, I hope that it can become regularized. Now, it is a one-off allowance, so $1,000 per year is not very useful. I hope it can be dispersed at least once every 6 months or on a quarterly basis. How about monthly basis, on a monthly basis? I think the right way to do it is to amend the policy. That is 90% of the households should receive MRA sufficient to cover their rent, because this will not affect the rental level. If there are rent increases, then that will only apply to the remaining 10%. And CCF also offer a living subsidy to low-income families. Well, AP families, 8,000. 1P family, 1P household, 3,000. 2P family, 6,000. Can it become a regular measure, please? Thank you, Mr. Cheung, for your views. The CCF has got pilot projects that are found to be useful in helping the needy. They have become regular programs. For instance, the CCF has provided subsidy for TPS tenants receiving CSSA. So this CCF fund has become a regular program under the SWD, and the relevant department is studying the details, and we will provide further information when available. And the CCF has also got 3 projects. First, to provide subsidy for elderly persons living in private housing, and also subsidy for people living in very poor living conditions. And third, for those who not getting enough. That is a subsidy for CSSA recipients living in rented private housing. So we will consider the outcome of the pilot schemes and then ask relevant departments to conduct in-depth studies. And I will also reflect Dr. Cheung's views to the relevant departments. Any further questions? Any questions? I hope that they will give serious consideration to my suggestion before we have a comprehensive mechanism to help those living in very poor conditions. They are the most needy group of the community, and I hope that such assistance can become regular, because just giving them a one-off subsidy do not give them any sense of security. Chairman, you said that in June there will be a preliminary conclusion. I hope that all recommendations can be available by June. Well, I have some questions, though I'm afraid the 2 officials may not be very familiar with such matters. Well, for Kaifongs living in very poor conditions, we once proposed to the government. Now, some issues might be related to the HD. For instance, the redevelopment of Park 10. Over half of the residents have moved out, but the PRH estate is not going to be demolished yet. So there are vacant units. Can these vacant units be allocated to people living in very poor conditions? I know you're worried that once they are allocated flat, they will be unwilling to move out. But there are people on the waiting list that will be allocated flats in 2 years' time. Can you allow them to stay in these vacated units first? Because from announcement to actual clearance, it will be about 3 years. So can you offer the vacated flats in places like Park 10 Estate? We are talking about 2,000 households as an interim, as a transition. And there are also vacant premises in the private sector. Some government officials are worried that once allocated flats, households may not be willing to move out if required to do so, and will legislators come to help to persuade them to go? And there are PRH applicants that are on the waiting list for 3 years. Now, this is just a tentative suggestion. And now, usually, you've been waiting for 3 years. You'll be allocated a flat in the suburban areas quite soon. And then for those on the waiting list for 5 years, they can be allocated to a flat in the urban areas. Now, you can discuss with URA. There are buildings planned for redevelopment. They are already acquired by URA, and yet the units are vacant and not occupied. And in some cases, the whole street, buildings in the whole street are vacant. And can these flats be allocated to those on the waiting list? And then the URA and the housing society and the government and even private developers. Private developers might have acquired flats, but they are not yet let out. So there are a lot of such buildings in Sam Shui Po and Tai Kok Choi. I won't mention the name of the company, but it's a famous one. The company or the developer might have already acquired flats in 50 to 60% of the buildings in the street. I think these vacated units are useful for transition. And if in future the construction of PRH has caught up with demand, growth and demand, you don't need to use this means anymore. You can provide some relief for those in hardship. I'm sure counting them all, you can get almost 10,000 units. Which one from the administration, please? First, Chairman, I think your analysis, is also our concern. Because housing is supply so tight, can we use our resources more effectively? Well, we have heard some similar suggestions.
For redeveloped housing estates, we also consider that. Well, firstly, there aren't that many estates that often. Now, you might be familiar with the case of Park 10. Now, that might involve 2,000 units, but they are not vacated at the same time. Now, there might be 1,000 vacant, and then there might be others within the coming year, and you went into quite a lot of detail. Sure, in theory, we expect them to move into PRH in 4 years. They've waited for 3 years. We let them move in. Now, if we demolish the housing in 1.5 years, it should be quite safe. However, the family composition may change. Now, they may change and want to move into urban area, or they don't want to take up the unit, we offer them. They want to move out. So there may be a lag when we want to recover the entire building for redevelopment. So we did explore the matter, but overall we feel that there are some concerns which we must make sure that we can resolve. But some of them do not seem feasible at this stage, but we will continue to study that. Now, as for URA and private developers, now for the URA, there are even less units, and as for private housing, private developers, I do not have the information. We agree, however, with the chairman that we should be more creative and not be restricted by many factors. Dr. Fernando Cheung, the document mentioned that right now the housing department will modify the internal facilities for the elderly or the disabled, but we still receive complaints that for the disabled or for those who cannot move about well, when they want to move into PLH. Now, when you allocate units, firstly, of course, you would consider that the units are barrier-free, or you would modify the units before they move in. You would modify the units for them. Apart from there being difficulties in the timing and in communications, now for some estates, they do not do that well in the areas outside the building. There may be steep slope, or there may be some difficult terrain. Now, so if you know that they do not have good mobility, you should take care that the right sort of units are offered. Otherwise, they feel very insecure while they're waiting. Now, for those estates that have more barriers, now try to rule those out for the disabled or elderly people, unless they specify they want such estates because their family members live nearby. Also, you mentioned the works in your document. Now, maybe you can look at the figures last year. How many elderly and disabled persons received such modification assistance? And finally, there are some units still which are not accessible by lift. Now, because of the level they are on. Now, is there a timetable now before all the housing estates are barrier-free to those on wheelchairs? Is it Mr. Liu? Thank you, Chairman. Now, Dr. Cheung raised the issue of barrier-free access for the disabled. Now, in the past, we have received complaints in this regard. The estate may be located on a slope. Now, so we allow the applicant to take a look at the unit first. Now, if the unit is not suitable for him, of course, we don't want that to happen. So before the allocation, we carefully vet the units, and we conduct an interview with the applicant, and if we feel there is a need, we talk to the applicant, we ask them what special needs they have, Secondly, about the lift, we agree in some old-style estates. Now, they have designed in some buildings where lifts only reach alternate floors. Now, those are 30-year buildings. So according to our regulations, the lifts have to be renovated every few years when they are 30 years old. So where technically feasible, we try to offer lift access to every floor. But in some cases, for instance, the top floor, because of the machine rooms being located on the top floor for the lifts, so for those floors in the older estates, we cannot have lift access for every floor. But we have a record of such buildings, and units on those floors would certainly not be offered to families with disabled persons. For those who are already living on such floors, maybe they become old or they suffer new disabilities, we provide them with a switching or swap arrangement. If they provide sufficient documentation, when we see the medical report or we go and visit them, they sit on a wheelchair, we don't even ask for a medical report. We will able to transfer them to another room. Now, 2 years ago at the Equal Opportunities Commission, there was a report on the buildings that do not have barrier-free access. Now, we included those residential buildings and shopping malls in our report, and the CE committed to take care of those now. So if people have problems, you can tell the EOC, if not the Housing Department. Ms. Chen Yun-han, now the real world is quite different. Now, at my constituency, now there are quite a number of disabled persons. They have to, in the buildings, people have to push heavy doors to get in. Now, there are more than one doors, and the EOC report is something different. I'm just talking about pushing doors into markets. Now, the Rehab Society had a major activity, and they complained to me about this access problem. Now, sometimes I'm disappointed because they don't carry out their commitments. Now, sometimes it's the government, sometimes it's the link rate. Mr. Chow, earlier you said that if it's double the income limit, they can still live there. If it's triple the income limit, they can't. Now, well, they meet the income requirement now, but once they exceed the limit, you try to get rid of them. Now, at the time, I was concerned about stamp duty. Now I can address this issue. Now, you will not be able to deal with that. Now, we encourage the young people to take care of their elderly. Now, such policies are good. Now, but in some cases, their incomes increase soon after they meet the twice income limit requirement. So very soon, with the both husband and wife working, the income exceed 3 times the stipulated income limit, but they have also to pay for other expenses. So once they exceed that limit, then they are chased out of the PRH. So I have to tell Mr. Liu, you have to change the policy. Now, Anthony Cheung now agreed with us in the housing panel meeting. Now, you encourage the young to live with their elderly, but very often, after a short while, the income limit exceeds the limit. So because you have a review every 2 years, so you have this means test which make young people unable to live with their parents. So you, for this harmonious family scheme, now even for young couples earning $20,000 or $30,000, they only offer $2,000 or so in support of their parents because they have to pay for their own expenses. So, are you determined to correct the situation, Mr. Liu? I thank Ms. Chen for her comment. Now, that's indeed the case. Now, when the income exceeds twice the waiting list limit, now 2 years later they have to declare the new income. If they receive a lot of salary increase, then under the wealth tenants policy they have to pay twice the rent, and after 2 years and the assets over 84 times, then we have to ask them to move out, and that's true. Now, on the other hand, if families who earn income over 3 times limit and they have 84 times assets, and now can they say buy second-hand HOS? Well, that's another matter. But on the issue raised by Ms. Chen, we will look at that in the long-term strategy review. So members and the public have given us comments on these. So we are now gathering the information for the long-term strategy review committee to see what policies are feasible. Wu Chi-wai first round and myself second round. Anyone more? Chen Yunhan, you, and not the others. So can we extend the meeting for a maximum of 15 minutes? Wu Chi-wai? I'm sorry, I went to the stamp duty meeting. Now, I haven't heard the other parts of the discussion, but I'm concerned about the harmonious family arrangement now in our community. Now, well, I'd like you to think. Now, the harmonious family scheme, there are certain conditions. First, those who are on the waiting list for PRH, if they are allocated unit in the same area and 6 in a different area, 6 years later they can move into the same community as their parents who are otherwise living by themselves.
Now, assuming that now I'm in the urban area, my father lives in Lower Wong Tai Shin estate. Can this condition be included in an allocation so that I don't have to be allocated a flat in Kwun Tong first, and come 6 years' time, I move back to be nearer to my father. I've said this a number of times. There would not be any impact on PRH resources. Another case is I'm living in private housing. I want to live with my elderly parents, and I will only be allowed to have my name added to the tenancy if I fulfill the income assessment. I'd like to know whether I will only be subject to an income and asset assessment after living there, after living there for 10 years or 2 years. And regarding the well-off family policy, it's been introduced for more than a decade. It is well established, but I have another worry. Some Gai Fong say that this is a nuisance to tenants. This is not a question of about decoration, but some parents are not willing to let parents know their income and are not willing to declare. So what means do you have to ensure that there is some coordination? Because as the waiting list income limit increases, well, the asset and income limit will move up higher and higher. For a 4P household, the income limit is $60,000 before you're required to pay double rent. But I know that many Gai Fongs don't want to infringe into the privacy of the children. As Madam Cheng Han said, some children, grown-up children, don't want their parents to know how much they are earning. And at the end of the day, it is the elderly person who suffers. So how will you ensure that the right to live there of the elderly tenants would not be jeopardized? Mr. Liu, Mr. Wu Chi-wai asked 3 questions. After adding the name of certain person to the tenancy, well, 2 years after the addition, there must be declaration of income, even though they have not been living there for 10 years already. Secondly, if the parents live in a PRH in Wong Tai Shin, and it is time to allocate a flat to the son and his wife, and the request is also in the urban area, well, we agree with Mr. Wu Chi-wai. We have a relocation scheme. It is better to allocate a flat nearer to the elderly persons, theoretically speaking. This is better than asking the couple to move after 6 years. Theoretically, this is true. But let's use Wong Tai Shin as an example. There is a family who is just a few places below this one. Now, this family may like to live in Wong Tai Shin. If we reserve the flat to for a family with a lower priority, this is problematic. We fully appreciate the aspirations of the community or applicants. If we can think of a way out to address these unfairness. Now, there are cases where the family concerned would rather wait until he is allocated a flat in the same estate of his elderly parents or just next to his elderly parents. This will also affect the timing for flat allocation. Yes, we fully understand the aspirations. We will continue to explore this possibility further. Now, assuming that both families are have reached their turn for allocation, then will the family with an elderly parents living in that housing estate be given priority? Yes, under our policy, yes, it's easier to handle that case. Well, I have some cases for you. I can refer some cases to you. And then declaration of well-off families. We understand that sometimes grown-up children don't want to let their parents know how much they earn, and we already improved the declaration mechanism. Assuming that there are 4 persons in the household, parents and daughter and son, we give individual declaration forms to each member of the household for returning to the housing department. In other words, technically speaking, the grown-up children don't have to go through their parents. Of course, after we have received all 4 declaration forms, and if it is found that the total household income attracts double or 1.5 times rent, we have to inform the household. So theoretically speaking, the principal tenant as well as all family members will have to make a declaration under our policy. We hope that this will address the problem. Now, each member will be given a separate declaration form. Just to follow on this very quickly. Living with elderly parents. Now, if I am not living in public housing and then I am able to move in because of my elderly parents, and yet 2 years down the road I'm required to declare my income and asset, this is not very fair. Because when I move in, I have to undergo income and asset limits. I have to go through the same procedures. Why do you assume that 2 years down the road I will suddenly become rich? I think to be reasonable, we should give parity treatment to these households as if similar treatment as to their counterparts. I think I give the floor to other members. Mr. Liu, a simple follow-up. Well, when it comes to the addition of these applicants, even if they have exceeded the income limit by, say, 1.5 times, we still allow the application. But 2 years down the road, he is required to declare. In fact, this person is originally not eligible for public housing because he has already exceeded the income limit. But we allowed him to have his name added so as to take care of his elderly parents. So 2 years afterwards, if it is found that his income is still higher than the limit, then it is appropriate for us to cut the subsidy in terms of in public housing. 3 minutes, Madam Chairman. I have many questions or issues I'd like to take out with officials when it comes to public housing, but we have to end by 6:45. Now, I will be happy if you are beating around the bush. Well, you have to have coordinated and comprehensive policy for the community. Please tell us, what will the long-term housing strategy review do about well-off family policies? And another issue, please be very succinct. Many of them have been waiting for 7 years, but not allocated flats. I'm sure you know them. These are true. We ask them to be given rent subsidy, and can we have interim housing? You may find that it is something new, but it takes so long for the government to build enough PRH. From 160,000 applicants has moved or increased to over 200,000 on the waiting list. I have many cases. How do you address them? Because these are poor people. Well, the timetable for the long-term housing strategy review, we've all long been saying that we expect that by the middle of this year, when the review is completed, we will have a basket of recommendations in the public consultation document for people to consider. And the long waiting time for PRH, yes, we have heard such voices. So individual families might be choosing a district where there is no PRH supply and then the waiting time is longer. But usually, if applicants are willing to relax a little bit, relation to the district they choose, I think the time can be shortened. No, it's not because of their choice, but this is a general situation. Do you mind if I give you a bunch of cases to follow up? Well, what you say is not fair to them. You should give them alternative housing while waiting. Now, if you can have better policies for applicants that would like to share flats with their elderly parents, I think the situation might improve a little bit. I think, Mr. Liu, please give me your name card. All right, with only 2.5 minutes left. All right, it's Mr. Wu Chi-wai's second round. I'll be very quick. Well, to assist, to allow ex-HOS owners to apply for PRH, but I know you don't cover ex-residents of walled city. You don't want to give them a double benefit, but even if they have gone bankrupt, if they are in poverty, you still do not allow them. Their request so humble. They just want to join the waiting list, but you don't allow them. So, if HA has relaxed the rule to the extent that ex-HOS owners can apply for PRH, and you don't allow ex-residents of Kowloon Ward City to do that, this is rather bad. Now, I'm talking about ex-owners of subsidized home ownership schemes, where there is a separate thing. But for those who have already got compensation or ex gratia payment, would they be allowed to apply for PRH? Usually it's not allowed, but if it is really extraordinary cases, no, that is not allowed. I've seen a CSSA case, no, unless it is referred by SWD for compassionate housing. So you should regard it as HOS. There is a revolving door for ex-HOS owners to come back to buy, to apply for PRH. Well, I can reflect the case to my colleagues for consideration. Okay, my turn. My question is very simple, but you may not be able to answer. I have already proposed 3 options for you to offer interim housing for people on the waiting list. Well, the development panel visited Holland, and then there they have vacant sites where there are where 6 layers of containers are stacked up together, and they have heat insulation material. Or perhaps Holland back then was not so hot. I didn't feel hot at all. We have so much empty or vacant sites in Hong Kong. Madam Cheng Han has even thought of flyovers, the space below flyovers. What about sites with no use at present? There are 800 sites. They are let or leased to the community at a nominal rent of $1. Well, you can have 6 or 7 stack or a container stack up together. And I think using our speed, we can, within half a year, build towers of 6 levels.
And some of the units are really handsome. Some of them were painted with nice design. So we can use this method to provide temporary housing. And we talked to the officials. Now, Chairman, actually, we are glad to hear these suggestions. We are all trying to think of ways, but of course I can't give an immediate feedback because for people to move in, we have to provide drains and electricity and so on. So we have to try to find ways to provide solutions. If you want to do it, you can do it. Technical difficulties are non-existent. Now, next time, the Electrical Research Division will have a document on poverty and housing with Singapore examples. Now, both of you, one is on welfare, and the other is on housing, but not on policy. Now, next time we will look at this document by Electrical, and it will talk about policy, new directions in other jurisdictions. So the Development Bureau and the Transport and Housing Bureau should both have officials sitting here. Now, both officials here today, maybe you cannot provide the right answers. You merely forward our comments. Next time, hopefully we will have the relevant officials. So we follow the amended timetables next time. Now, the Long-Term Strategy Review Committee, now they will have something in June. Maybe we can discuss.